Okay, this is our recorded lecture number 3. Sorry that I couldn't make it work for a live lecture on Tuesday. Just hopefully this kind of conflict won't happen again. So in terms of attendance, obviously the attendance is fluid. I'm just going to throw in a couple of questions in the lecture and then you can answer them in an email. We are going to cover basically the middle part of the Iliad today. And I'm thinking 4, possibly 5 total lectures will cover the Iliad. I think the Iliad is important because it's sort of, it's the grounding for Greek literature in the same sort of way that Greek literature is the grounding for European literature. So without a good firm grasp on the Iliad, it's very hard to make sense of what comes after it. When we last spoke, we were talking about Iliad Book 6, and we looked at the 2 set pieces that really frame Book 6. On the one hand, you have the monomachia, the duel between Diomedes and Glaucus, and at the other end of the book, you have the interview, if you will, between Andromache and her husband Hector, which sort of ends in a bit of light, what I call it, lightheartedness, where the little child is, Astyanax, their little son, is afraid of the helmet, and he sees the helmet and the hair, the horse hair on his father's head, and he starts to cry, and the parents kind of laugh at this. It breaks the tension of the moment being this sense of doom that Troy is destined to fall. Very much like the end of Book 1, where the tension has to be broken by some sort of comic character. And in that case, it was Vulcan. It was Hephaestus, who, by sort of stumbling around as he was serving the gods their wine, provided a bit of comic relief. In Book 7, we have another great duel. It's basically Book 7 is involved with the duel between Hector and Ajax, who is the great warrior who is still with the army now that Achilles has more or less departed. So let me share the screen so that we can talk about some of the text. Of course, I should share the screen that actually makes sense. We'll have to first open the screen that has the Iliad, and then hopefully we can get a screen share. Yeah, that works a little better. Hector issues a challenge. Hector was joyful at these words, and with a level spear shaft held back the Trojan lines. They sat down, and Agamemnon made the bronze-greaved Achaeans do likewise. Then Athena and Apollo of the silver bow, in the guise of vultures perched on Aegis-bearing Zeus's tall oak tree, enjoyed the sight of those warriors in serried ranks, bristling with spears, glittering with helmets and shields, like a darkened arm of sea when a fresh westerly wind, that is, ripples the surface. So the seated Greek and Trojan armies covered the plain. The gods are disguised here because, except for Achilles and in a few other instances, the Greeks don't see the gods, right? But they probably can see them when they're disguised as birds. And Hector gets up, standing between the 2 armies. Hector gets up and says, "Bronze-greaved Greeks and you Trojans, hear what my heart tells me. Almighty Zeus has not preserved our truce, but with cruel intent makes us fight on until you Greeks conquer Troy's high walls or are slain yourselves besides our sailing ships. The finest men of Achaea lead your army. Let the man whose heart prompts him to challenge me step forward from your ranks as your champion against this noble Hector." So Hector issues a challenge because, as we said, the battle between in Book 3, the battle between Menelaus and Paris ended in kind of like a draw because the Aphrodite intervened, and Paris was sort of whisked away from the battlefield. So Hector shows a great deal of civility and almost a sense of international law, if you will, right? There's a kind of a dignity even between opposing armies that has to be respected. And so he addresses them in a very dignified manner, right? Doesn't insult them. And he says, he speaks of himself in the third person. This is another instance. I don't think any other character in the Iliad can speak of himself in the third person. Hector always sort of steps outside of himself and he sees his fate sort of playing out. It's the opposite of narcissism, right? In narcissism, you see yourself so entirely that you don't know it's yourself, and you lose your mind because of your image of yourself. Hector is exactly the opposite. He sees himself playing out his role in history, and he fully appreciates what's happening to him. He continues, I say, and may Zeus bear witness, if your man, whoever you choose, right, slays me with his sharpened blade, let him strip me of my armor and bear to the hollow ships, but leave my body to the Trojans to bear home, so that they and their wives may give my corpse to the flames. But if I kill him, and Apollo grants me glory, then I'll take his armor to holy Ilium and hang it in Apollo the far-darted shrine, and give the corpse back to the benched ships, so that the long-haired Greeks may give him burial, and heap a mound for him by the broad Hellespont, that future voyagers sailing by in their benched ships over the wine dark sea shall say, this is the mound of a warrior long ago whom glorious Hector slew in his prime. So shall they speak, and to my undying glory. So Hector's glory, to be sure, is a motivating force for him. He doesn't deny that he wants to be praised. He wants songs to be sung about him. But it has to be in a way that's suitable for the gods and dignified for humanity. There have to be appropriate funeral rites. There's no reason, once the battle is over, once one man has been killed, there's no reason to take it any further. There's no reason to desecrate the corpse. It's a very important theme because Achilles, at the end of the story, of course, Achilles mutilates or attempts to mutilate Hector's corpse, would have mutilated the corpse, but for the intervention of the gods. There are also intervening scenes in the Iliad where the armies will stop fighting so that they can collect their dead and give them a proper funeral. And the idea of a mound, right? So the burial mounds. If you look in Greece and the Mycenaean evidence, they're very elaborate. They're sort of they're stone cone-like tombs, the sort of thalos tombs, which are empty vaults inside, like cone-shaped empty vaults made of stone, very, very closely fitted stone. And there's like a mound of earth on top of them, so they look like a hill, like a natural hill. And the tomb of Achilles supposedly was on the Hellespont, and Alexander the Great, so the story goes, visited the tomb of Achilles as he was moving eastward with his army. So what Hector says here in this paragraph shows you that he recognizes the existence of rights and responsibilities on both sides of the battle, right? And tradition, right? What do you do with a warrior's armor when you've conquered the warrior? You take the armor and you dedicate it to the god, right? So in this case, dedicating it to Apollo. The Greek army must have, at hearing this, have thought, this is a very sort of awesome kind of figure, right? This man has a sort of the term that Aristotle would have used is a megalopsychos. He's a man of great soul, right? After Hector spoke, a silence fell among the Greeks, ashamed to refuse, but fearful of his challenge. Finally, Menelaus, with reluctance, rose to his feet and reproached them bitterly. Ah, you braggarts, you women of Achaea, no longer men, what a dark and dreadful thing, if not one Greek should stand to challenge Hector. Sit there and rot, turn to dust and slime, you cowardly crew. I will arm myself against him, though victory lies with the gods in heaven. So he put on his fine armor, and Menelaus, that would have signaled your death at the hands of Hector. The narrator Homer steps outside to address the character. We call this apostrophe, right? When the narrator addresses a character in the story, he says, "You, Menelaus, would have died," right? Had not the Greek king Agamemnon leapt up, his brother, right? Leapt up to restrain you. Atreides himself, Imperial Agamemnon, seized you by the hand, saying, "Zeus nurtured Menelaus, you are mad. Such foolishness is not needed. Restrain yourself, however painful it might be, and think not of rivaling a greater warrior, Hector, son of Priam, dreaded by all. Even Achilles shudders to confront this man on the field of glory, one who's your superior by far. Be seated again with your comrades. We Greeks will find some other champion to fight him. Brave he may be and filled with battle lust, but he will be glad to kneel and rest if he survives this fatal combat and the war's fury." So interesting to note that Menelaus says almost exactly what Thersites said in book 2, right? He impugns the warriors. He says, "You're not men." He sort of, this is in a very, sort of patriarchal society. This kind of gender shaming was not unexpected. It was fairly common, right? We think of it as quite inappropriate. But in this context, it's not surprising to see. So how is it that Menelaus can say what got Thersites in trouble? Well, it's very clear. Menelaus is a king. His brother is the king of the entire army. So he has the street cred. He has the status to say these things to the army, whereas Thersites, who was a nobody, did not. But also Agamemnon, in a moment of great clarity, says to his brother, you are not up to the task of fighting Hector. He is your superior in warfare. So Agamemnon is not completely deceived when it comes to the outside world, right? He's his megalomania, his narcissism, if you will, can cloud his vision, but he's not completely irrational, right? He sees, he sees Menelaus, he sees Hector, he says, no way is this going to work, right? This is a mismatch. But it's, of course, he doesn't, Menelaus, he says, isn't up to the task, but Agamemnon doesn't step forward and say, "I'll do it," right? He's not going to go and fight Hector. So they have to figure out who's going to do it. Nestor, the aged horseman who's been to war for 3 generations, he fills his usual sort of role here, which is the institutional memory, somewhat the blowhard who gives the old stories and the old wisdom. He's sort of like, the grandmother stories. The Bubba mind says this kind of like, oh, this is the way it was in the old days, And he says, now it's enough to make Achaia, to make Greek men weep. How that old horseman Peleus, the noble orator and still leader of the Myrmidons, would groan, he who once enjoyed questioning me on the birth and lineage of every Argive. If he could hear how those same men cower before Hector. It's like, he's Peleus is Achilles' father, and Nestor is going back a generation, saying, "Oh, Achilles' father fought with me, and we had adventures together, and I was his equal." But obviously, Nestor is way too old to fight Hector, right? But they have to figure out who is going to do it, and he goes on with the story. But it turns out that it's going to be decided by a lottery, right? So they decided, okay, whoever wants to try their hand at this lottery, stand up, and you can put your chip into the helmet, like, a little token or something that has your name on it or your initial or something, right? And they're going to shake it and see which one flies out. Kind of like drawing straws, I guess, right? First was Agamemnon, then mighty Diomedes, and we read about Diomedes and Glaucus. And then next, both characters named Ajax the Greater and Ajax the Lesser. Ajax the Greater is the one who is the second greatest warrior after Achilles, and a few other characters. And they cast lots, and it turns out that Ajax's lot comes out. So Ajax, in a sense, was chosen at random. He was one of 9, It wasn't like he sort of got up and said, "I'll be the only one," and everyone else kind of ignored him. So, but at the same time, it was sort of foreseen that he was going to be the one. He was the only one really who's up to the task, and he's overjoyed at this, right? Friends, the lot is mine. My heart is overjoyed, for I foresee I shall conquer noble Hector. Now, while I don my battle gear, pray silently to Almighty Zeus, the son of Cronos, so the Trojans cannot hear, or rather, no, pray openly, since we fear none. No man's will shall put me to flight against my own will, nor yet his skill. I was not born and raised in Salamis without skills of my own. Pray to Zeus. And of course, the audience, the readers know that Zeus is favoring the Trojans, and so it's kind of a lost cause. But they do pray to Zeus, and Ajax puts on his armor, and they go head to head. Right, the fight is sort of almost like a dance, right? And of course, the opening sally or the opening exchange was verbal, right? The two heroes are going to confront each other verbally. Ajax halted near Hector and challenged him. Ajax says, "Now, Hector, you'll see face to face what we Greek generals are made of. Even though Achilles, lion heart, breaker of men, waits idly among the beaked sea vessels, angered by King Agamemnon. And even though Achilles is out of the picture, we're still in it. Many of us still dare to face you. So let battle and mayhem commence." Ajax and Hector then come to the middle of the space between the armies, and Hector replies to him, "Prince Ajax, heaven-born son of Telamon, don't try to frighten me like some feeble child or woman ignorant of war. I know all there is to know of conflict and killing. I know how to swing my shield of seasoned hide to the left and right, and how to use it sturdily in a fight. I know how to dash among the charging chariots drawn by the swiftest mares, and I know how to tread the measure of angry Ares in close encounter." To tread the measure of Ares means to dance the dance of war, right? "Yet I'd not strike secretly at a man like you, but openly and hope to hit you." So there's an ethic of battle, right? You do not, no cheap shots, nothing below the belt. You strike openly, you strike in full visibility. You don't hide behind somewhere and then shoot an arrow or something like that, right? The truce was broken by an arrow shot, which is always considered like a less dignified way of fighting than face to face. So the fight begins, and Hector throws a spear, and it hits Ajax's shield, but it doesn't go through. Then Ajax hurled his spear, and it in fact hits Hector's shield, and it does go through, and it tore the tunic. In other words, it went actually and cut some of the fabric that he was wearing, and scraped Hector, but it was a flesh wound. Then they try again. Hector thrusting a spear, and Ajax doing the same, and Ajax's spear actually pierces Hector's shield, and it does make a substantial cut in Hector. So there is some blood flowing. Hector is wounded, not grievously, not seriously. That's going to stop him from fighting. He's not going to bleed out, but it is a substantial wound. And they then do something that is maybe uncharacteristic of warriors. We wouldn't think of it as a normal part of the routine. Since they've used their main weapons, they pick up stones and they throw stones at each other. Once again, Ajax has the better of the contest because he's bigger and stronger. So he picks up a bigger rock, and Hector is knocked back on the ground by this. But they, even though it's clear that if this were a boxing match and you were scoring it on points or something, Ajax would win. The fact is it's a draw, and now night is coming, and they would have done the final part of the dance of Ares, which is they would have gone at each other with their swords in close combat. But because it was getting dark, the heralds come in, the messengers come in, Once again, Talthybius, we always see him on the Greek side, and Idaeus the Trojan, and they raised up their sticks and said, they stopped, they called a fight. Cease to fight, dear sons, break off the combat. You are both loved by cloud-gathering Zeus, fine spearmen both, as now all can see. Moreover, night is falling and must be obeyed. So because it's nighttime, and as Hector said, you can't fight at night because it just doesn't seem fair. I mean, it's fair in that it's just as dark for both sides, right? But it doesn't seem to be a clean combat. Well, for one thing, no one else can see what's going on. No one else can see if you're getting help, if other people are intervening. But it's just thought to be less noble unless you're supposed to fight. It's like playing baseball in the dark. Before baseball stadiums were lit, they stopped the game because it would just become chaos, right? There's a famous scene in Apollonius's Argonautica. Apollonius wrote an epic in Hellenistic times. So after the death of Alexander the Great, in Alexandria in Egypt, during that time of great sort of cultural or sort of renaissance, if you will, Apollonius writes a 4-book epic about Jason and the Argonauts. And there's a famous long description of a fight happening at night. And it's almost like a comedy. I mean, it's bad because there's, there are people being killed, but they're being killed in a dishonorable way because they can't see each other. So some people are killing their own comrades, what have you. So we'll get to that in a minute. I just have to pause the recording for a second. And we will get back to this in a minute. Just let's see. Okay, I'm just going to pause the. Okay, resuming the recording and resuming the screen share here. Just give me a second. It's honestly, I've never, after almost 2 years of teaching with Zoom, I've never really made my peace with Zoom. I'm always fumbling around, and I don't know if it's just I'll never be comfortable with Zoom, I think. Okay, here's the screen again. So it's nighttime and you can't have a fair fight. So, okay, fine. They separate, and then what happens? Hector of a gleaming helmet addressed him. Ajax, a god granted you power and stature and wisdom too, and preeminence with the spear beyond all the other Greeks. Let us cease from combat for the day. Later, we'll fight, and may a god judge between us, granting victory to one man or the other. But night falls now, and it's best to obey. Your presence will gladden the hearts of the Greeks beside your ships, your kith and kin above all, your friends and family, right? While mine will please the Trojans and their long-robed wives throughout all great Priam city, who will meet to offer thankful prayers to the gods. But let us now exchange noble gifts so that Greek and Trojan alike may say, rivals, they fought in soul-devouring conflict, but they were reconciled and parted friends. So saying, he handed Ajax his silver-studded sword with its scabbard and its trim baldric, while Ajax gave him his bright scarlet belt. So they parted. Ajax back to the Achaean lines, and Hector to the throng of the Trojans, who rejoiced to see him there alive and whole, safe from Ajax's strength and his unconquered arms. So they exchanged gifts in the same way that Glaucus and Diomedes exchanged gifts, but this is a little different, right? This is another violation of the loyalty that one owes to one's city, right? In a sense, you've established a relationship of friendship, the Greeks would call it xenia, with someone who is trying to destroy your city, right? it's hard for us to understand why this kind of thing happens so easily, because we've become so we've moved from the aristocratic type of culture um, now for so long, right? In this country, let's say 250 years or so, and it goes back to the tradition in the United States of not giving someone a title, right? No one has a title. People have an office, but they can't be a lord. They don't have an elevated status just by nature of their birth. However, in the military, for instance, this is the kind of scene that would have played out at the end of the US Civil War between General Grant and General Lee, right? Even though they were fighting on opposite sides, even though that each was trying to annihilate the army and the nation of the other, even though Grant was theoretically fighting because of trying to end the institution of slavery, and Lee was trying to fight to perpetuate the institution of slavery. For all of these reasons why they should have been mortal enemies to the very end, they treat each other in a rather civil way. Go back to the American Revolutionary War. How do generals surrender to each other? They give up their sword, right? Cornwallis gives his sword to George Washington, for instance, or General Burgoyne gives his sword up, right? It's this kind of token that's saying, like, you realize who I am, right? I'm a general. I have a status. You can't mistreat me. You can't treat me like a POW, right? You can't treat me like a nobody. But I do acknowledge that you are the winner, right? It's like shaking hands, and parting friends. Well, I mean, I can understand it in chess. I can understand it, in all kinds of games. I can understand it in baseball. But in warfare, you would think that, the need for victory would overcome this kind of civility. And yet it doesn't, right? So the significance of the sword, though, that Ajax gives Hector, or that Hector gives Ajax, is very sort of moving. Again, we go back to the question: how much of the backstory that we know from other sources are we supposed to import to our reading of the Iliad? Well, the story of Ajax after the death of Achilles, and after the sack of the city, or just on the eve of the destruction of Troy, goes something like this. Achilles dies, and there is a contest among the Greeks as to who is entitled to carry the armor of Achilles. The armor of Achilles we haven't gotten to. We'll talk about it next time. This beautiful magical armor that Vulcan or Hephaestus made. But for some reason, they decide that the armor is not going to go to Achilles' son, Neoptolemus, who you would think would inherit it, but is going to be awarded as a prize to the greatest remaining warrior. Who is left, right? And once Achilles is gone, the two people who are left, who the obvious candidates, would be Ajax and Odysseus. So both of them go before the Greek army and they make their appeal. They give a speech. Ajax says, "I was always the one who, led the battle. I was the main defense. I was afraid of no one. I even fought Hector, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was the soldier. I was the greatest soldier of them all." And then Odysseus says, "Yes, it's true that in terms of pure physical strength, Ajax was the greatest soldier. However, I was the one who came up with all of the tricks, all of the deceptive things. There's even in book 10, you have a night raid in the Iliad. We probably won't get to book 10, but book 10 is an interesting component in the Iliad because Odysseus and Diomedes do something at night which is completely shameful. They go into the Trojan camp fully armed when everyone's asleep, and they kill as many people as they can. They just butcher them, right, as they sleep. And they steal these very valuable horses, the horses, sort of divine horses, if you will, of Rhesus. It's like a burglary and a theft. It's exactly the opposite of what happens in book 7, right? So Odysseus is the person who is not above the use of nighttime and darkness, not above the use of trickery to get his way. And the Greeks have to decide who is the most valuable player. Is it Odysseus or is it Ajax? The Greeks decide that it's Odysseus, that Odysseus did more for them with his tricks and his lying and his deceiving than Ajax did with his brave, manly fighting. So Ajax cannot endure this judgment. It actually drives him insane. And it drives him insane to the point that he wants to go out and kill as many of the Greeks as he can. So he prepares to do just that. And Athena sees what's going on, and she sends a sort of a madness to Ajax. She makes him lose his mind. And instead of killing the Greeks, what happens with Ajax is he goes and he kills the sheep that the Greek army has been keeping nearby for food, right? It was an army that has to eat every day, right? An army has to eat every day. And it's like a little village, like a city, right? They've set up their boats, they've set up their defensive wall, their palisade, their, a wooden wall, what have you. But in addition to fighting and repairing the boats and repairing their armor and repairing their bodies from fighting, they have to cook and do the other things that you need to do to survive. So they have animals there, and Ajax basically slaughters all of the Greek animals, right? Which, it's destructive, it's costly, right? It's a costly thing, but it's shameful because like anybody could do that. Anybody with a sword could go out and kill all the goats. It's not the work of a hero, right? So Athena then lifts the madness, and Ajax looks out and he sees all of these dead corpses, but he realizes that they're not Greeks. He thought they were Greek soldiers. In fact, they're just corpses of animals, mostly goats and sheep. And his shame is such that he can no longer face the army. So what Ajax does is he takes the sword of Hector, and he goes off and he takes off his armor, he buries the sword in the ground, and he falls on his sword. He commits suicide out of shame. He disgraced himself in this behavior. The significance being that it's the sword of Hector that kills him, right? No man living could have had the status to be Ajax's killer. Only Hector. Hector's not even living, because at this point Hector's already dead. But Hector's sword, which in a sense is a representative of Hector, is the sword that Ajax uses, right, to commit suicide. So book 7 raises that question of warfare, of just how far allegiances go, and can honor overcome your political allegiance. It seems like we've had 2 instances now where Homer believes that honor can sort of be preeminent over your allegiance to your king or your family or your country, whatever, however you want to call it. And with that, we have not much else going on in book 7. There's a pause once again where they collect the dead, the book 8 is devoted mostly to affairs of the gods, and Zeus is prophesying the course of the war. Not really a much read book. Book 9 is the book that's more commonly read. It is the so-called embassy to Achilles. And by the time book 9 rolls around, the Greeks realize they need Achilles in order to win this thing. And Agamemnon has finally come to his senses. Agamemnon says he was met by the goddess Ate, or madness. Right? He doesn't take responsibility so much. He says, the goddess of madness caused me to do this, right? Agamemnon never seems to take responsibility. But in any event, he's ready to talk and deal with Achilles. So they decide, who would Achilles like to hear from? Who would be the most persuasive? And they choose Odysseus and Ajax, right? Who eventually will be sort of in conflict with each other. Odysseus because he's such a good speaker, and Ajax because he represents military virtue. And the third speaker they choose is someone by the name of Phoenix, who is Achilles' sort of surrogate father. He's an older warrior. He was sent with Achilles to be sort of a servant, but really more of a mentor, right? And so the speeches occur with the longest speech first, and that's the speech of Odysseus. And Odysseus proposes, well, first of all, Agamemnon tells everybody what he's going to give to Achilles. There's a long list of great stuff, gold and silver and tripods. And then he's going to give Achilles the right to be the king over various cities. And he'll even give Achilles the choice of Agamemnon's daughters to marry. But Agamemnon says Achilles has to respect my authority. No matter what I give him, Achilles has to realize that I, Agamemnon, am still the boss. I'm the king of kings. He can be a king, that's fine, but I'm still the king of kings. When Odysseus delivers this speech, he omits, it's almost verbatim, like word for word, he tells Achilles exactly what Agamemnon offered. He lists everything in great detail, but he carefully omits the last part about how Achilles is going to have to be subservient. Achilles' response to that is, I don't want to, I'm not going to give up my life for, for goods, right? You can't, they're not commensurate, right? Life and wealth are not commensurate. Achilles' answer to Odysseus goes like this. Odysseus of the nimble wits, royal son of Laertes, I will tell you straight how I feel and how things must be, to save you sitting there beside me, dealing in endless talk, so that you don't have to keep going and waste your breath. Hateful as Hades' gates to me is the man who thinks one thing and says another. Right? This is Achilles in his essence, right? Incapable of lying and incapable of dealing with lying, right? So he's really incapable of dealing with Odysseus as well as dealing with Agamemnon. So here's my decision, he says. Neither Agamemnon nor any of the other Greeks will change my mind, for it seems that there is no gratitude for ceaseless battle with our enemies. He who fights his best and he who stays away earn the same reward. The coward and the brave man win like honor. And death comes alike to the idler and to him who toils, right? It's sort of like a crapshoot in war. Whether you live or die is a matter of chance. It doesn't matter if you're fighting and risking or hanging back, right? So he says, there's no profit to me from my sufferings, endlessly risking my life in war. I am like the bird that brings every morsel she finds to her unfledged chicks and goes hungry herself. I watched through many a sleepless night and fought through many a blood-stained day, battling warriors for the sake of their women. Goes on to list all of the the victories he's had, but he says, you know what? Let Agamemnon keep it all. I don't care. And then he asks, so why did the Argives war with Troy? He's like, why are we here in the first place, right? Why did the Atreides, why did Agamemnon and Menelaus gather an army and bring it here? Wasn't it because of Helen? Are the sons of Atreus, are Menelaus and Agamemnon the only men on earth who love their women? Every sane and decent man loves his own and cherishes her as I loved her, referring to Briseis, his captive, right? So she was captive, but now Achilles is suggesting that maybe she would have been sort of his bride, right? As I loved her with all my heart, though but a captive of my spirit. But since he stole the prize from my hands and cheats me, let him not try to win me now with his offers. He will not sway me. I know him too well. Every sane and decent man. It's like the appeal of someone in a labor union, right? It's not the appeal of an aristocrat, right? The aristocrat would say, I am above all men and I have been slighted. And what Achilles is saying instead of that is, I am just like every other man, right? So how do we reconcile this? Achilles seems to have these occasional epiphanies, right? Or moments of lucidity where he sees himself as purely mortal. But they're not consistent episodes, as we'll see as we look at his other interactions. But I would say that in terms of our discussion of narcissism, this is a moment where it's very clear that Achilles can break away from the narcissistic mindset, and he can say, "Look, I look at myself objectively as someone who works hard and wins battles and brings home the loot, but Agamemnon takes it all, right?" So it's objective. It's the opposite of narcissism. The next person to speak is his tutor, mentor, if you will, Phoenix. And Phoenix describes all of the nice things that he's done for Achilles. He's helped him grow up. When he was a baby, when Achilles was a baby, Phoenix would have him sitting on his lap at the table with all of the royalty there, and he would feed him little pieces of meat and little sips of wine, and he kind of raised him. He's sort of like, Achilles is Peleus' son, but I guess Peleus being a king, there are always several layers that you have between a king and the other people in his household, even his son. So he has tutors and governesses and whatever else, and caretakers. And Phoenix is the person who kind of plays the father figure. Very important, because Achilles is obsessed with his father. There are multiple layers of paternal obsession with Achilles. You can have a Freudian field day with Achilles, right? On the one hand, there is the father who was not. That is Zeus, right? Because we know that if Thetis had had a child with Zeus, that child would have overthrown Zeus. So Zeus is the father that cannot be. Then there is the father that was, the physical, biological father, who is acknowledged by Achilles and who Achilles will inherit from and inherit his kingdom, and that's Peleus. And then you have this fellow who's like the stepfather, the surrogate father, the tutor, the tutor who plays who has this sort of paternal role, which is Phoenix. And then lastly, in book 24, you have Priam, who is Hector's father, who is like the substitute father, because he is no longer a father in the sense that Priam has lost all of his children. And in a sense, he is no longer a father. And Achilles, in a sense, is no longer a son, because he knows that he will never leave Troy again, and he will never see his father back in Thessaly. So the fact that they are both sort of like free-floating radicals, right? The sonless father and the fatherless son in book 24, they kind of have a fusion, and they have this sort of wonderful interaction in book 24. But the answer that Achilles gives to Phoenix is that basically, you are, Achilles says to Phoenix, "You're part of my household, right? Don't go making the enemy's argument." Swift-footed Achilles replied, "Phoenix, my father, my aged lord." See the respectful language. He treats him as if he were really a father. "Beloved of Zeus, I have no need of such honor. I have no need of the stuff that Agamemnon wants to give me. I am honored by what Zeus ordains for me, whatever fate comes my way, right? I'm honored to stay by the beaked ships while there is breath in my body and life in my limbs. And I tell you this, and take it to heart. Do not try to sway my mind with shows of grief. Don't tell me stories about how the Greek army is suffering, all because of me, right? On behalf of that warrior, Atreus' son. Don't try to lay the blame on my doorstep," Achilles says to Phoenix. "Lay the blame where it squarely belongs, which is on the doorstep of Agamemnon and his brother, right? Take care not to love him and so incur my hatred. I, who love you better. Better for me if you anger him who angers me," right? Right. So basically Achilles is saying to Phoenix, remember your true allegiances. And what are your true allegiances? Not as a messenger for this king, but as part of my household, right? And that's the end of Phoenix's argument. What can he do? There's no bad blood between Achilles and Phoenix, right? It's just that we can't go, he says we can't go there. We can't go making the argument, making the enemy's argument. So he says, just stay here with us. Like you stay in my tent. We'll make a nice bed for you, and then maybe in the morning we'll go back home, right? The last speaker, because he's the military man and therefore perhaps the man of fewest words, the last speaker is Ajax, and he simply says, "Look, we might as well go. We're wasting our breath." He says to Odysseus, we'll achieve nothing by staying here. We must go to the Greeks and tell them the news, bad as it is. Achilles' proud heart has raised him to such a pitch of fury, harsh man that he is. His comrades' love, which we in the fleet honored him above all others, will not move him. He shows no pity. Yet a man accepts blood money even from his brother's or his son's killer, right? There's a tradition, right? In Old English, it's called the wergeld. In Greek, it's called the apoina. It's the money that is agreed upon to stop a feud, right? If one person in one family kills someone in another family, there will be a feud, murder for murder forever and ever and ever and ever. How do you stop it? You stop it by the two families getting together and agreeing on a price to be paid, some kind of admission of guilt. So if someone in family A murders someone in family B has to get together, right, and say, we're going to come after you unless you pay a certain price, right? It's sort of, if you read Sir Henry Maine's Ancient Law, it is believed to be one of the sort of the ways in which law is sort of born out of tribal society, right? The idea of blood money. So Ajax says, we have this tradition, and yet this guy Achilles is so tough that he's not even human, right? He's like a stone. Nothing is going to move him. Achilles has to say something to him. And he says, look, Ajax, the last thing that you said, right, about my dearest friends, right, in the army, it hurts me. I feel it. Yet my heart, where I feel this love of my comrades, swells with anger when I recall how the son of Atreus shamed me in front of the Greeks as though I were some wanderer without rights. You must go and give my answer. I will think no more of bloodshed, no more fighting for me, right? As though I were some wanderer without rights, which really recalls almost the position that Chryses, the priest, is in book 1, and the position that Priam will be in book 24, the sense of someone who just shows up defenseless, and just isn't part of your society and has a very uncertain status. You don't know where this person stands in terms of rights and responsibilities. And Achilles says, look, he's treated me as if I didn't rate at all, like if I had no status whatsoever, and that overwhelms his feelings of friendship for the rest of the army. So this embassy returns without any resolution, and the question is, what will bring Achilles back into the battle? And the only thing really that can move him now, and the question of the Iliad is how to thaw out the icy heart of Achilles, right? Once Briseis, the girl, is taken away from him, he will not listen to the embassy. What will bring him back to some kind of humanity? The next episode will be what happens to Patroclus. Patroclus is his relative, perhaps a cousin, his close comrade, someone like sidekick almost. Some people have suggested that they were lovers. It's not very clear, but it's very certain that Patroclus is the one that Achilles loves the best, right? He is the follower that Achilles loves the best. And in book 16, Patroclus cannot stand to see what's happening to the army, and he decides that he is going to do something about it. We'll just take a quick look at book 16, and then we'll save it for next time. Remember, Achilles said that he was like a sort of like a mother. Very strange image for this male warrior, this sort of epitome of masculinity to suggest about himself, that he takes on this feminine role. But he does it again in the beginning of book 16. When Patroclus sees what's going on, he asks Achilles, let me go out. He says, Patroclus, you groaned heavily in reply. Once again, the author or the poet Homer uses the literary device of apostrophe. He talks directly to the character in the story, right? He doesn't just narrate the story, but he talks directly to Patroclus. This is always sort of a moment of heightened emotion. And he says, Patroclus, you addressed Achilles in this way. Achilles had been saying to him, why are you crying, Patroclus? Do you have any news from back home? Is your father okay? Is my father okay? From what we know, they're fine. So there's no reason to cry. So what? The Greeks are dying. Are you crying for them? Right? Let me know what is on your mind. And Patroclus says, Achilles, restrain your indignation. Now great sorrow has come upon them, our Greeks, our friends. Our best men lie wounded, right? Diomedes wounded. Agamemnon himself is wounded, right? Odysseus is wounded. The healers can't do much. Achilles actually is one of the ones who's skilled in medicine, so you would think Achilles is probably one of the ones you'd want out there, not only fighting, but actually helping them patch their wounds. But he compares Achilles to a stone or a tiger. He says, you are no son of Thetis or the horseman Peleus. Rather, the gray sea and the stony cliffs bore you with a heart of granite. If in your mind some prophecy deters you, maybe some word of Zeus that your divine mother relayed, then at least let me take the field now and let me lead the ranks of the Myrmidons, so that I may be a saving light to the Danaans, like a torch, right? Metaphor of a light that is a savior. It's very interesting because it has a long history in European literature. So Patroclus is saying, let me put on your armor and go and just make believe I'm you. And the soldiers will see that Achilles is back, and they'll take heart, and they'll have a bit of a rally, right? Patroclus made the request, fool that he was, for his own doom was sort of locked into this request, right? Homer wants us to know that once this is done, once Patroclus gets his way, puts on the armor, a whole series of things is going to be set into motion that's going to lead to the death, not only of Patroclus, but also of Achilles. First Patroclus, then Hector, then Achilles. Achilles, he goes back through the story about why he's sitting out the war, and the Greeks, they deserve what's coming to them, right? It's because they disrespected me. Agamemnon got away with it, so the Greeks are getting their comeuppance. They're getting what they deserve to get, But he says, all right, if you really want to do this, right, then you can do it. But when you drive them from the ships, assuming that it works, and you drive the Trojans away from the ships, then come back, right? Even if Hera's Lord Zeus grants you glory, don't press the battle, because that will only lessen my own chance of honors, right? This is a moment of, I would say, insecurity. This is Achilles' greatest moment of insecurity. What is going to ruin Achilles' honor? if it turns out that just looking like him, like Patroclus, just by wearing his clothing, will actually get the job done. Right? He doesn't want, he wants Patroclus to be well, he wants Patroclus to be honored, but he wants Patroclus to be honored in a kind of a secondary level. He doesn't want Patroclus to rise to an Achilles, right? You don't want your servant, your second in command to sort of go over you. And so he says to Achilles says to Patroclus, go ahead, do your thing. You can put on my armor if you want. Try and get the Trojans away from the ships. But if if it works, don't go the full way and don't try to conquer the city, because then I will lose my honor, right? And so that's what happens. Patroclus arms, and soon he comes into conflict with Hector, and that's where we're going to pick up the story next time. You will have, at this point, you're probably in a good position to write about the death of Sarpedon, which is the second essay. And there's that wonderful vase, the Euphronius vase. If you read lines 426 to 507 here, you will be in a good position to write that essay. So with that, we're going to call this lecture a wrap, and it will be posted soon on the blog. And I would ask you the following questions. You could just sort of send this to me in email. How does Patroclus characterize Achilles in book 16? What imagery does he use, right? And we could leave it at that, just one question, right? How does Patroclus characterize Achilles? All right. Achilles is always shifting, right? Achilles is shifting between, he's a force of nature. This is really what makes you think that the Greeks thought of him as sort of a god. He's at one point a human being like everyone else, just a regular working stiff. At another point, he is like, beloved of the gods and destined for mortality. And then he is a stone or an inanimate object, right? When he shows no emotion at all. So he ranges through all of creation, as it were. Okay, I wish you all a good night. Once again, sorry that I have not been able to do this in real time, but we will resume real time on Wednesday at 8 p.m. And until then, hope everyone is well.